Europeans have never had ass. For all their centuries of conquest, all their trembling little fingers scrabbling across continents, for all the wealth they ripped from living bodies they could not understand, Europeans have remained biologically, structurally, and spiritually impoverished in one crucial way. They have never had ass. Not figuratively, not metaphorically, anatomically, structurally, culturally. And when we say Europeans have never had ass, we must speak comparatively, because across Africa, Asia, the Americas, and the Islamic world, the ass has been a site of vitality, dynamism, movement, and memory, a living archive of physicality and grace, while Europe has remained stubbornly a land of compression, stiffness, and absence, while the ancestral populations of Africa, Asia, Oceania, and the Americas evolved under conditions that favored dynamic movement, sprinting across savannas, scaling mountains, cultivating rice paddies, climbing rainforest canopies. Europeans, isolated in the frozen wastes of the Ice Age, became a sedentary, hunched, skeletal people. African populations evolving in environments demanding explosive movement and endurance developed high muscle mass in the glutes, hamstrings, and quadriceps, producing the most dynamic posterior chain development on Earth. Indigenous American populations adapting to diversified environments from the Andes to the plains, cultivated bodies conditioned by running, climbing, ritual movement, and dance, all gluten-dominant physical expressions. Southeast Asian and Oceanic peoples moving through tropical forests and island terrains retained crouching, squatting, and leaping abilities that stimulated gluteal and pelvic development. Early Islamic civilizations spread across Africa and Asia, preserved dynamic movement through trade, horse riding, martial arts, and ritual practices like salah or prayer, which involved full-body kinetic engagement, including squatting, bowing, and kneeling, maintaining a supple, active pelvic structure. Meanwhile, Europeans huddled in caves, their bodies adapting not for motion, but for stillness. Their hips narrowed, their glutes withered. The pancake ass was not an accident of fashion. It was baked into their frozen evolutionary history. Across the non-European world, the ass was used, and thus preserved. African traditions centered the body as an instrument of spiritual and communal expression. Dance forms like the sabar, the gumboot, the agbakor demanded and celebrated gluteal power, coordination, and rhythm. Indigenous American rituals, from powwow dances to Mesoamerican ball games, reinforced glute-dominant athleticism and deep squatting postures, unknown to the medieval European peasantry. Asian martial arts, from Shaolin Kung Fu to Indonesian pencak silat, emphasized low stances, rotational power, and explosive gluteal engagement as sources of strength and fluidity. Islamic cultures inheriting African, Arabian, Persian, and Turkic movement traditions cultivated physical literacy through horsemanship, wrestling, dance, and prayer rituals that kept the body supple and rooted. By contrast, European feudal society suffocated the body. The peasantry was immobilized by brutal agricultural labor that demanded no dynamic movement, only mechanical, repetitive strain. Nobility laced their bodies into rigid corsetry and armor that crushed the pelvis and immobilized the hips. Catholic monasticism preached the mortification of the flesh, the deliberate suppression of bodily vitality, including movement and physical pleasure. Thus, not only did Europeans lack ass anatomically, they abolished it culturally. When Europeans burst out of their frostbitten corner of the world and encountered global peoples, they were immediately obsessed with bodies that violated their compressed aesthetic. The Khoikhoi, whose gluteal development was normal in southern African populations, became objects of grotesque fascination, with Sarkis Bartman's body paraded and dissected in Europe, Not because it was abnormal, because it was too normal for the world outside Europe, and shattered their narrow, shriveled standard. West African captives, whose strength, endurance, and gluteal fullness were literally the foundations of the plantation economy, were simultaneously enslaved for their labor and fetishized for their physicality. Native American dancers and Asian martial artists were subjected to voyeuristic, ethnographic exhibitions, their bodies recorded, studied, and pathologized because they displayed forms of movement and musculature that Europe had long since extinguished. The European mind could not reconcile its own physical poverty with the abundance it saw elsewhere, so it turned observation into pathology, admiration into exploration, documentation into domination. If medieval Europe was already skeletal, industrial Europe was corpse-like, as non-European peoples continued traditions of dynamic movement. Africans maintaining dance traditions even under enslavement. Indigenous peoples resisting assimilation through ceremonial movement. Asians maintaining martial and agricultural practices that preserved bodily vitality. Europeans industrialized themselves into further bodily atrophy. Factory work demanded stillness. Schooling demanded stillness. Office life demanded stillness. Sitting in chairs for 14 hours a day became the new biomechanical norm. Gluteal muscles, already weak, withered to near non-existence. Pelvic structures, already narrow, collapsed even further. Flexibility, strength, vitality disappeared. By 1900, the average European body was so compromised that military recruiters in Britain and France noted with alarm that working-class men could no longer perform basic physical feats required for soldiering, an issue literally noted in gluteal and pelvic underdevelopment. The 20th and 21st centuries saw the full collapse of the European fantasy of the flattered skeletal ideal. The Black Atlantic birthed musical, athletic, and cultural forms that recentered the ass. Hip-hop, dancehall, capoeira, samba, twerking, all movement cultures that celebrated gluteal dynamism. Globalization forced Europeans and their descendants to face their biological deficit. Padded undergarments, cosmetic surgeries, Instagram fitness fads teaching bodybuilding workouts centuries too late. The Brazilian butt lift, a grotesque attempt to simulate what had been annihilated from European lineage, emerged as a billion-dollar industry marketed mainly to white women, desperately seeking to purchase through anesthesia what had been lost through history. But a surgery can implant fat. It can't implant rhythm. It can't implant kinetic memory. It can't implant the historical, communal, and spiritual connection between the ass and the body's relationship to earth, the divine, and the community, a connection preserved across Africa, Asia, the Americas, and the Islamic world, but dead in Europe. The ass is not just anatomy. It's memory. It's history. It's the record of movement, rhythm, resistance, nourishment, and joy. All things whiteness has historically extracted, banned, or erased. So no, Europeans have never had ass, because ass is not just gluteal muscle. Ass is culture. Ass is motion. Ass is inheritance, and that inheritance was lost the moment they chose ice over rhythm, conquest over communion, compression over expression. They can steal gold, they can steal land, they can steal labor, but they will never steal ass. Cope.